Hi, welcome to week 5 already of RiSE, the podcast. It's the weekly podcast that intends to bring positive change to the world. We defend the small business owner, the entrepreneur, creativity, new ideas, problem solving, independent critical thinking as well, and finding a new path forward and a way where we can bring our passion and a little blood, sweat, and tears to make the world a better, safer, more supportive place. And each week we feature great guests who are making a difference for good, whether it's how we do business or how we lead at work or making communities stronger or eradicating things like poverty and touting abundance or new ways to heal and be healthy or empowering our youth to be all they can be and also learning maybe from our elders too. This is a show and it's a journey of ideas and solutions and new thinking that has us wanting to create a vision for where and who we want to be moving forward. And today's guest is Cheryl Martin. And Cheryl's story began much the same way. After spending years in a relationship where she was made to feel small, not important, and stripped of her own voice and power, her spark was dimmed. I mean, you'll see she's got a big, huge spark in our interview as we progress today. Cheryl had just become, or had become just an echo of the true light that she truly was. That is until Cheryl was introduced to these life-changing mind-body tools and began the process of healing her pain and reclaiming her own power. And what she learned is that Soul Spark, her company, can burn bright again. With Cheryl's guidance and coaching, you now have a choice and the opportunity to heal your past if you're going through trauma or any sort of, abusive issues or relationships. And you can heal your past, release the old story, change your belief system, and step into your true path. Cheryl works as a coach, a teacher, facilitator. She's a businesswoman. She realigns her clients to their authentic selves, facilitating them to transform their inner voice and achieve their full potential. Welcome, Cheryl. Good to have
Thanks
you.
so much for having me. Hi, how
Hey,
are you doing, David?
I'm good. I'm good today. On this, we're recording this a little early. This won't go hit the social media channels until the weekend, but we're recording this on a rainy Wednesday, midweek, the first day of fall too,
It
right?
is, it is, and
Yeah.
it's welcoming fall in with like a lot of rain.
I know. I got the arc. I'm working on it in the back. So if you see me, floating by
Then
tomorrow,
stop by and come and get
I
me.
will. I'll give you a lift. You know,
Oh,
come on board for lunch.
yeah,
So you're pretty open about this. You're a trauma
yeah,
survivor, and according to CAMH, the definition of the word is this: trauma is the lasting emotional response that often results from living through a distressing event. Experiencing a traumatic event can harm a person's sense of safety, sense of self, and the ability to regulate emotions and navigate relationships. Do you resonate with that definition?
absolutely, absolutely. Um, yeah, that's what I find. Like that's what I felt for myself. A lot of those things lasting, kind of like almost like impressions or echoes of an experience that stick around, and those echoes or those impressions really influence the way that we see the world and also the way we continue to respond. So, absolutely. It's funny because right before we talked, I opened up my little notebook here and it, at the top of my notebook, it just said, trauma is the Greek word for wound. And so when I think of trauma, I think of unhealed wounds or wounds that are still scabbed over and still impact us in some way. And yeah, so that's what I think of it as. And also that trauma isn't always a big thing. There's like you'll hear some of the experts say big trauma, big T trauma and little T trauma. And it's really trauma really happens when we don't have the resources that we need in that moment to process the experience. So it could be something really small, like your parents going away on vacation and not really telling you when they're coming back or something like that, or them just being late to pick you up for some reason. right? If you don't have someone there to support you, like a teacher, or a sibling to explain, hey, it's okay, mom's just late. There's probably a traffic. She's coming. Um, or if you don't have the ability to process those emotions on your own, then that's when trauma can happen, because we get stuck in the fear cycle, and
Yeah.
it kind of locks into our bodies. Yeah.
Yeah. A couple of weeks ago stubbed my foot in my, not stubbed it on an item, but I was walking in a store and my shoe got kind of jammed or stuck on the floor, and I didn't fall, but I tumbled. And then after I was like, I felt a bit of emotional tension. And so
Sure.
traumatized by something like that. I wanted just to ask you though, in your journey, when did you realize that you were being traumatized? Like, what was the opening?
I think, if I can speak for myself as a woman who went through a lot of abuse, it was about 15 years that I was in that relationship. Um, our unconscious mind does a lot of things to protect us from recognizing how badly we're being hurt. Um, so, there was always some sort of awareness unconsciously that it wasn't right and that I was being hurt. But it wasn't until I left, and this is this is what I find when I speak to a lot of other survivors, and people who've been through like some major traumas, that you don't realize it until you're out of the situation usually, and that's because your unconscious is protecting you. So when I left because I was worried about. I was really concerned my daughter was going to become, a target, and that she was going to pick up on that kind of behavior and think it was okay. uh, it wasn't until I actually started going through some counseling myself, when I realized how damaging it was for me and how much pain was attached to that. And so it's kind of a it doesn't always hit you at once like a big ton of bricks falling on you. It Our unconscious does a really good job of protecting us and helping us process it slowly, and it it works so much better when you have a supportive person there, who's trained, who can help you through it. But
Yes.
even a family member or friend can do a good job if they're really just kind of holding space for you.
Right. Were there any warning signs?
What do you mean by warning
Like
signs?
early warning signs? You said
Oh, for
your
sure.
subconscious was protecting you.
Oh,
So
yeah.
what
Uh,
were some of those early warning signs that, hey, you know what, this isn't feeling right. This isn't healthy.
yeah. So the first thing that I would say was probably a warning sign, which I was completely unaware of, as most people are when they're in that situation, is just like a feeling of always being on alert. Um, in my past experience, and I just want to put a trigger warning here in case I say anything that might trigger anyone. Please reach out to David or myself or someone else who's supportive of you. If I say anything that does trigger you, it's important that you get support.
Thank you.
If that's okay, I'll tell a little bit. I'm not going to tell
Yeah.
anything extreme. Just like when I would go to the grocery store, and I took a long time because I decided to, like, go to the dollar store and just kind of browse. Because, when you're a mom and you've got young kids, sometimes it's nice to kind of get that little time for yourself, right? The problem was, when I was gone for more than an hour, I would come up with some lie in my head to tell him so I wouldn't get in trouble. So that's kind of one key warning sign, is that you are already expecting something to go wrong before it's even happened,
Mm,
right? And it's kind of like anxiety. Um, it feels like anxiety. So if you've ever had that anxious feeling,
mhm.
it's kind of like that. So that's one thing. Um, Another thing that showed up for me was probably about a year before I left. My body started breaking out in a rash, and so it started out in one small spot. I'd had very, very mild eczema as a child, so when it showed up, I was like, okay, I've had this before. It's not a big deal, but it spread to cover 75, 80% of my whole body was covered in a red, like itchy, painful rash.
Mm,
And what my unconscious was communicating to me, I didn't know at the time, was that I didn't want my partner to touch me anymore, because most of his touching was in anger, or it was not fulfilling my emotional needs, right? It didn't mean that everything was abusive, but it wasn't It wasn't loving, and it wasn't caring, and it wasn't, those kind of things that we all need. So I developed this rash that told me, there's something seriously wrong, and also we're going to make sure that you are in so much pain that nobody wants to touch you.
Mm.
And so the bodies can actually participate in that communication with our unconscious to tell us something is wrong. So some people feel like a lot of stomach aches, they might get a lot of headache. um, Autoimmune conditions can often develop from unresolved wounds or unresolved trauma, stuff that you need to deal with. And so I do see a lot of clients with autoimmune conditions and long-term chronic pain. And most of the time, it's some trauma at the root of it that allows your body to start going through the healing process.
So what began to play out in your day-to-day life then, Cheryl? And you've already alluded to a little bit of it.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
for example, you talked about your health, but what about, how did it play out in your mental well-being as well? As a woman and as a young woman in the world, and a mom and everything.
Yeah.
How did it affect the mental well-being and mental?
Um, it was funny because I had a job that I loved at the time. I used to work in the environmental field, and so I would go to work, and I was a completely different person at work. I was me at work, excited, fun, adventurous, joking around with my colleagues, getting the work done, but enjoying it and having fun while I was doing it. At home, I was just kind of a shell of myself, constantly on the lookout for, making sure I did everything the right way, kind of staying within the lines or within the box of what was expected of me. Um, it started to affect my relationship with my daughter, and she was young at the time. She was, 2. She was not quite 3 when I left. So most impact was probably when she was 1 to 2. But there was conflict between the two of us over her. So there was a lot of worry, a lot of anxiety, projecting what could happen in the future, worried about, um, you know, how it was impacting her. I think for me, a lot of the time, and I can speak probably from the clients that I've worked with, when we're in the middle of the trauma, our mental wellness, we're not almost not even aware that there's a problem. Um,
Hmm.
I didn't know, like I was emotional, but I was also numb at the same time, right? I would have the emotions, but I was shutting them off and pushing them down. And so, when I did have emotions, they were very huge, um, almost like breakthrough sadness or breakthrough anger. It was very big. So it showed up in like road rage. It showed up in fighting with my family, um, because those are the kind of people. Those people love us forever, right? Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, most families stay together no matter what you do. So you usually have those emotions with people who will love you no matter how big they get. So that kind of stuff was showing up.
Did,
um,
did it
yeah.
affect your work at all? As you said you were
Um,
okay at work, but did it affect maybe
Later on, after
productivity?
after I left, it did, and that was because, you know I think the world has this concept, and I say the world in general because I know there's a lot of people who don't think this way, but like society in general thinks that once you get out of that relationship, that you're safe and that you're okay, and that's simply not true. Like, the fact is, you're probably physically safe, and we know the statistics on women who have actually left abusive relationships, and when I say women, I mean, anyone who's left. It's
Mhm.
more statistically women, but we see this kind of abuse in every kind of relationship. But those people who leave, um, can be at risk too, after they leave. The society seems to think that once we're out of the relationship, then everything's okay. And that's simply not true. In fact, that's when the mental, emotional, and spiritual stuff starts to show up, where you're constantly worried about what's going on. You're constantly feeling threatened by your partner. That's when productivity at work goes down because you're not quite in the same survival mode that you were in before. Now it's a different survival mode, and your unconscious starts bringing up. And when I say you, I'm really speaking for myself. But
Yes.
my unconscious would start bringing up things that I needed to work through, right? So yeah, productivity went down a lot in a few years after abuse. And in fact, I mean, when I really evaluated, I think that's why I left that career. I mean, part of it was because, I was struggling to keep up with the level of work that I was doing. And also, our brain function changes when we're in fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
And that rational thinking, the calculating, the writing reports, the organizing, it all kind of shuts down or gets, diminished because we're so focused on keeping ourselves safe. And so it did impact my work. And if I went back and talked to those employers that I'd worked for at the time, I'm sure that now they could tell me that was why. Um, Things didn't go well for me, when contracts ended. I didn't get the next job,
So
and
this,
that's okay because it got me here.
yeah, that's true. That's true. You got to look at your, the whole picture, right? So, well,
Totally.
yeah, so it affects your life, your health starts to, to
Hmm.
wane. What about the social interactions with others, like other women
Yeah,
and, you know, I don't know if jealousy would come up, like, oh, you're in a,
for sure.
good
For sure.
relationship, so what happens in that? How does
Mhm.
trauma affect us in that social life balance
Yeah.
situation?
So I alluded to before about the making excuses about coming home late from shopping.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, like that kind of thing can also show up like in the social situation. Not so much for myself, but I've heard from many women whose partners suspect that they're cheating, um, that are accusing them of those kind of things or of not putting them first. There can be financial abuse where your ability to access the money in your family is very limited or completely under someone else's control. And so, making a decision to leave can be impacted or, even just to access support, right? Um, Not being able to, have that time on the internet. And we saw this in the pandemic with women not able to connect with their social workers or their counselors because the person who was their abusive partner was in the home. And so even those sessions over Zoom were impossible. So, um, on top of being kind of, you know, locked down with the person who is abusive, the ability to reach out wasn't there. So it totally can affect your social life. A lot of women will voluntarily shut down their social life because um, the anxiety and the worry around what would happen if I kind of stepped out of line. And it's, of course, that person, the abuser's line, not yours. But what will happen if I step out of line? The consequences of, going against the other person are much bigger than you not seeing your friend,
Mhm.
So for me, I actually went a whole year without seeing my twin sister
Wow.
in that last year and a half. I can't say exactly when it was. Um, and that's when my daughter was like a year old. Like she didn't see her niece for almost a year. Um, and that was mainly because of the conflict that arose every time I saw family that I would have to come home and justify their actions and their responses. And it was so painful to do that it was easier just not to see them.
Right.
And so it becomes very, very isolating.
This is I'm going to get to it after, but you
Hmm.
you were obviously involved with in a narcissistic
Yeah.
relationship,
Yeah.
and so my question here before we get to that
Hmm.
is what once you're out of that, what's the
Hmm.
like, or not you, but somebody is
Hmm.
out of that kind of a relationship and has left. What's the likelihood of going into the next relationship and seeing a repeat of that?
I think it really depends on how much work you do on yourself, right? So, um, most of these patterns where we find ourselves in an abusive relationship don't begin in adulthood. They actually begin in early trauma in something that happened in your childhood. And it doesn't mean that you came out of an abusive relationship as a child. It often means a relationship or something that happened that disempowered you. So abuse is a result of disempowerment. And disempowerment means, you know, at a time where you couldn't speak up for yourself or you couldn't do the things that you wanted. It could be that someone took the choices away from you. It does often follow with someone who's had that experience as a child. Either their parents were abusive to each other, or they had a parent who was abusive or narcissistic, where this is kind of like a learned behavior for them and they learn how to cope. So all of the things that we do that make ourselves small and keep quiet are coping mechanisms, right? It's not that there's anything wrong with you, it's how you survive, right? But those behaviors become locked into our nervous system and our unconscious as this is what keeps me safe. And so if you don't become aware of those behaviors, then you'll do them in the next relationship. You'll do them with your friends, you'll do them at your work, you'll do them with your romantic partner. So funny enough, I went to one of those abused women's groups and I sat through there and I realized, okay, I really have to do the work on myself because I don't want another relationship like this. I don't, I know what it feels like to be me. Um, the person who was at work and enjoying and having fun in the, in the streams and, joking around with my friends, um, going out for dinner, when I could after work and that kind of thing. That was the person I wanted to be, the real me. So I did a lot of inner work. And I think that is the key to breaking the cycle, right? And it doesn't mean just for you. In fact, like anyone can ask me why I left. I didn't leave for me. I left for my daughter. I wanted to break that cycle. And and so I think I have, she's 15. I won't know for sure until she gets a little older, but she definitely doesn't have a box. She definitely speaks her mind and asks for what she wants. So, fingers crossed, it's some good signs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of that, it's all about, changing your own inner beliefs, right? Our picture in our head of what that experience was and recognizing that in those moments when you had to do something that went against who you are at the core, that spark inside of you, you were doing it to keep yourself safe. You were doing it to stay alive. You were doing it to protect yourself and your family. And when you're out of the situation, that's the time when you work on yourself. And I highly encourage you to connect with a professional to do that, because our unconscious mind is not easily accessible one-on-one. Its job is to keep you safe. So if you're trying to break patterns and it still thinks you need to do that, you really
Yeah.
need a guide, someone who's skilled in helping you work through that and make those changes because
Yeah.
they're not always the easiest, but they're totally worth it.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah.
And we're looking, I've noticed in the past 18 months, during COVID, we're
Mhm.
living in such a traumatic time too, because almost the same behaviors that you went through and experiences, we're going through globally, we're going
Yeah.
through collectively. And this notion of trauma has really come to the forefront during
Mhm.
these past 18 months. Why do you feel that is?
Um, well, if we look at the nervous system and the way it responds, it doesn't really look at the situation that you're in. It looks at like like the fact that there's a threat. Um, so if our unconscious has at some point repressed or buried that experience in the past where we've had a little bit of trauma, anything that feels similar in your body, an emotion, anything that triggers something similar will reignite that response that you had in the past.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
So
we're
it's
all being reignited.
yeah. So we're all and reignited. You'll hear the word trigger,
Hmm.
re-triggered, and so triggers are actually a cascade of responses that is locked into our nervous system, like programmed in as a way to keep us safe. And so being told to stay home for a lockdown, like that's what happened to most of us at first. If you have been in a situation where you have not had choice, if you have been told that you have to stay within these lines, and it could be just that you had very strict parents growing up who gave you a lot of rules, and we know what happens to teenagers when they rebel, right? They're done with the rules, but the feeling that happens in your body and the emotions that come up when you're under that kind of strict rule, all of that gets re-triggered by a similar situation that feels the same, right? And it's not about how you think about it, right? Those emotions are not controlled by the thinking part of your brain, your neocortex. They're all controlled by the limbic part of your brain, which is the emotional part, and a very old part of your brain called the amygdala, or we call it sometimes the reptilian brain, although
Hmm.
that's kind of discriminatory against reptiles. Um, but those are the parts of our brain that control survival and and helping us like live, right? So the pandemic, with first the isolation part and then the mental health challenges, not being able to connect with our friends, which is one of those ways that we actually self-regulate our emotions and our emotional state, is by being around people who care about us and who can change the way we think by, telling jokes, watching movies, having a glass of wine, and just kind of being together. When those things are removed, then we get easily pushed into that survival response, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, the masks sort of are about, not speaking your truth. Um,
Absolutely.
the social distancing, we need to hug, we need 12 hugs a day.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
not being able to see, and then the guilt that well, if you don't social distance, you'll kill grandma. It's like, what's up with that, right? So
Yeah. There's
yeah.
a lot being triggered right now. Um, and then if we start talking about personal choice, and I mean, I don't want to get into the debate because
No.
this isn't what it's about, but
No.
we talk about like vaccines and the passports coming up. That's taking away choice, and that also is triggering people
Yes.
in a different way, but very similar. It can have the same like response in your body.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And it deadens the soul, and it deadens our spirit too.
It does, because personal choice and freedom are very much linked together, um, and that's all linked to being who you are authentically, right? Being able to be different from other people, to celebrate who you are. And so, yeah, for sure, having all of these rules really kind of, you know, whether they're for good reason or not, it's like I said, that rational part of your brain isn't able to connect and convince your body and your nervous system and your unconscious why it's doing it. It's really, it becomes disconnected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the documentary with Gabor Mate, who you
Hmm.
introduced me to that, and they're,
Yeah.
they're coming out with part two, right?
Are they? Oh,
Yeah,
I thought I saw something about
yeah,
it.
I'll email you. And
Perfect.
and social media speakers and teachers like Kyle Cease, who I really like,
Hmm.
or Phil Good, or Lori Ladd, and a few other notables are all talking in some form or another about trauma.
Hmm.
And is that because that during these COVID times, we're seeing the ugliness and darkness of life more and more, and our hearts maybe are starting to crack open a little bit more too? And yeah, what's your take on that?
Um, I like how you said how our hearts are starting to crack open, because it really does take um, a, 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 a traumatizing or a very severe emotional experience for us to transform a lot of the time, right? We talk about wounded healers and how someone like me would never have taken up coaching if I hadn't gone through that experience, if I hadn't had to heal myself. Maybe I would have been a teacher still, but I don't think I would have been coaching. It's a painful world to work in it sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I don't like hearing stories of people who've been hurt. In terms of like the the prevalence of talking about trauma right now, I think from my own experience, and like I've been working in the area of trauma for probably 4 or 5 years now, um, and I've found that when you're on social media and you post about trauma or you post about abuse or even share your story, that there's very little acknowledgement of it. People have a perception that liking a post about abuse or even someone's journey to coming out of abuse indicates that they relate to it, right? It's a very hush hush situation. We don't talk about it. In fact, you know, what's been on the news this week is with Gabby Petito
Mm,
in the States, and how we're not even sure that it was an abusive relationship, although the signs seem to point there, especially if you've been in that relationship, you can totally recognize um, a lot there. And I was reading a post last night on a mom's group, and I was so shocked at how many moms said, me too, I'm a survivor, that related to that story. Um, there's a lot more than you would expect. Um, I can be honest and say almost every person who walks into my office who joins me on Zoom to work with me does have um, abuse or some sort of like relationship style trauma, right? It's a
And-
lot more prevalent than we think. So I think it's
yeah,
just it's we've come to recognize how common it is, and there's a like a salve in recognizing collective trauma, and that we all have it. It's almost in some ways a little bit comforting to know that we're not alone, to know that there are resources and people out there that can help us or even just support us and understand where we are. And I think like the wisdom of trauma and the pandemic and people finally being willing to talk about it has opened doors. And I think that's the broken open part. Like
yeah,
that,
I,
that's
I,
that's what
I
I call it, the
I
broken
agree.
open.
And I'm getting, tingles as we're talking about this. So that's good,
Yay.
my confirmation. So
Yeah.
you talked about collective trauma, and we're seeing such, big examples in the past, 18 months, probably before too. I mean, this isn't something like new, but
No,
I think just things are magnified right now. It's almost like, God's taking a magnifying glass on us all and saying,
totally.
we got to look at this.
Hmm.
And before we were in a make-believe world of escape, and I got the best car and the new clothes, and I'm going to the ball game, and I like baseball. Don't
Hmm.
we escaped, but now
Yeah.
we're really forced to look at it. So, for example, the journey of abuse
Hmm.
that Canada's own Indigenous community has had to
Hmm.
bear over and over for many, many years. How do we begin to heal that collectively, Cheryl? And we're with Cheryl Martin. She's in
Yeah.
our home office north of Toronto. She's
Yeah.
a coach, a healer. Yeah, how do we begin to heal collectively from collective trauma, especially like
Hmm.
in that situation?
I think the most important thing to do when we want to heal that kind of collective trauma is to listen to the people who have been traumatized. Um, I'm not Indigenous. I do have a little bit in there, but it's not enough for me to say anything. What I can say is if I can speak from like the experience of someone who's been through abuse, the most empowering thing that anyone did for me was to ask me what I needed, how they could help me. And so, you know, I have all these tools and resources that I could help, a single Indigenous person or a community to heal. But what do they need? What do they want? And they're quite clear about what they need and what they want. And it's up to us to make sure that we participate in giving them what they need. And so when we talk about truth and reconciliation, there is a huge document out there that our government has committed to. So that's a good place to start. And the other place, of course, is if you know someone personally or you have friends or you want to contribute to a community, ask that community how you want to help, not just for Indigenous communities, but there are other communities out there, Black communities, BIPOC communities, LGBTQ2S communities. There are lots of people out there who have collective trauma. And it's important to ask them. And that doesn't mean that we're putting it on them. It's allowing them that space to give us like the information about what they need, what's missing, where did we go wrong, and about working through those things ourselves where we have contributed or not been able to see where we've gone wrong. It's we can't heal someone else's trauma without taking the responsibility for how we played into letting it happen, whether you did something specifically or whether you let it slide, you know, brushed it off. Because when, coming from that abusive background, um, when I first left, I heard a lot of, you just have to forgive him. You just have to let it go. And I'm sorry, you can't just let something go like
No.
that. There's a process that you have to go through, and the process is an internal process of um, really recognizing what you've been through, how it's impacted your life, and what you missed, what you didn't get, where your values were violated, where you were stuffed into a box or not allowed to be yourself, and reclaiming all of that and is what allows you to heal. It's not just about putting up boundaries. It's not just about saying no, you can't, because if you haven't healed a lot of the stuff on the inside, it becomes angry and resentful and guilt driven at times. And we want people to heal fully. So
Right.
yeah, it's
And
a lot of space holding, right?
yeah, and yeah, space holding, and that, I guess that's collectively, and then also holding the space for groups like that. You know, I look at the immigrants that came over from, oh, what country
Hmm.
was it? In the Middle East a couple of years ago, or
Somalia.
well, Somalia, or
Yeah,
new immigrants, and
yeah,
usually they're leaving traumatic situations, and then I
absolutely.
guess the same methodology that will go into healing collective trauma also will heal individual trauma as
Yeah, yeah.
well. So
I mean, yeah, we can look at an individual, and work with them one on one and find out, how they interpreted and how they were programmed, or how they were uh, programmed to survive the situation was in, and work with those things individually. But there's also collectively, and there's a couple techniques that I have that work on generational trauma, um, healing at the cellular level, healing at the quantum level, and going back along generational timelines.
mhm,
And and they're really amazing. Um, I also think it's really important for us to look at, like, if we're talking about Indigenous people, they have some amazing healing methodologies, and um, a lot of the work that I do is I found from researching and learning about what they do is very aligned. And so, you know, allowing them to lead, like, they know how to do this work. They've been doing it for thousands of years, many more years than we've been doing healing work. So, let's go to the experts because they're the experts.
yeah, and
Um,
we're shutting that down, we're shutting them
yeah,
off, and
yeah,
we're shutting their voice down too, and we need that's what this show's about. It's like we need new ideas and new ways of doing things. Maybe the
yeah.
way we're doing life is harmful, and it's abusive, and
I
yeah.
think that's something that's come out of the pandemic. Like, we're so much more aware um of where we're being triggered, and there's a whole scientific reason about that. It's our window of tolerance is a lot smaller than what it was 2.5 years ago.
Yeah,
And that ability of us to flex between the emotions, to be able to handle the changes in emotions and the changes in stress level in our lives. Right now, our window is small, and it's harder for us to handle those changes and those stressors. And so that's why people are becoming a lot more aware of what's going on.
right.
And the
And
awareness is the first step to change, right?
yes,
Awareness is that first step. Once you're aware there's a problem, then you can address it. When you're unaware, then you're just emotionally reactive,
right.
right? And that's when you're on that emotional roller coaster.
Yeah. And
So
it might mean cutting people out in your life for
it
now. And
can, yeah.
and I'm hearing a lot of that. It's like, yeah, I was friends for years and now I don't hear from them, and yeah,
So there's two reasons, right? So it could be from boundaries, right? We've
Mhm.
we've set a healthy boundary that says, um,
No,
I need to stay within these people because they're supportive and they contribute to me and they don't drain me and all of those things. But the other thing that we see is, and it goes back again to that window of tolerance. Um, if I can, like, your window before the pandemic was like this big, right? You can handle all those stressors in your life, the amazing days, the hard days, the lots of emotional days. But as that pandemic showed up, our window gets smaller, and now those days are outside of this box, and so we become hyper alert, hyper aroused, very triggered easily, and that's at the top. And at the bottom, we can also become detached. And so if you see someone who is, not responding, cutting people out of their lives without explanation, sometimes it's because they've gone into a really protective mode, and that's not healthy either. So those are the kind of people you do want to reach out and just make sure that they are okay,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Wow.
It's been 18 months. Like this has actually become neurologically our new normal. And so
Well,
it's
it's
going to
not,
take effort to change
yeah,
it.
it's not normal.
No,
Nothing
it's
about
not.
it is normal.
It's not.
I don't want to call it new normal. I want to call it,
Okay. Like it's
an
our new homeostasis.
yeah, yeah, an thing.
And it's horrible that it is.
It is.
And the awareness that it is is what will allow us to
Yeah.
change, right? Yeah,
You
we
know,
have to be aware.
I was just watching a YouTube video earlier this week
Mhm.
with a fellow by the name of Damien Wynn. Very interesting guy. If you don't know who he is, check him
I
out.
don't. No. Okay.
He leads beautiful meditations, and he's doing a lot of clearing work. And in the video, he was talking about trauma originating when we went from the womb into the delivery room. So
Mhm.
from womb to room.
Yeah.
Sorry, pardon the little pun there. And the trauma of birth and the experience of coming into the world can be harrowing as well as beautiful. So trauma, Cheryl, takes on all kinds of situations. And you never would have thought about that, because it takes a brave little soul to come into this world. And I think on the soul level, we kind of know what we're coming into. And it's like, I know when I was born with a stomach defect. I had a valve that was too tight. It was called pyloric stenosis. And I
Okay.
think in the way that was my, way of like my exit plan. And it's like, but I got fixed, as you could tell.
Yeah.
But, it's kind of like, I'm not so sure I want to come here, So my question is, as I said, trauma takes all kinds of situations. Never
Yeah.
would have thought about that, right?
No.
So how then can we play or do life with pain? Play with pain. How can we play with the pain and really still be able to not let it take over with bad habits, bad relationships, bad life choices, and how can we play with it so that we can actually live to our true potential?
I think the answer is curiosity.
Mm,
Curiosity. Um, as adults who are aware of trauma and when traumatic things or potentially traumatic things happen, like for example, you see a car accident happen in front of you. Curiosity in after helping the people and getting out and doing what you can, curiosity later to say, okay, so how did that sit with me, right? Asking ourselves those questions to say, am I okay? Reaching out and talking, right? Curiosity and support. Um, like I said before, trauma only becomes trauma when we don't have the support we need in the moment of trauma and after, like in the after impact, like after effect. I don't know what the word is. Um, and also when we don't have the tools or the resources to process through those emotions and through the bodily reactions, right? So when we have a fight or flight or traumatic experience, um, it's important to recognize that we have to release that experience from our body. Um, have you ever like I'm sure like you've seen like where a kid falls down and the mom just picks him up and says, "Oh, you're okay." Meanwhile, the kid is actually bleeding, and they've tumbled around or something, and they've lost their balance and or whatever. They don't know what happened. Um, that simple fact of just saying you're okay and brushing it off and not allowing the kid to actually check for themselves can be traumatic,
yes, because you're not
right?
allowing the kid to express themselves.
So processing through emotions right after the trauma is the most important part. And it could be anything small. Like I'm sure we've all been driving around and just avoided an accident. And you know that your body gets that whole rush of adrenaline. You go into fight or flight, you immediately react. You don't think about how you turn your wheel away from or how you hit your brake. Your body just reacts, right? That's your rational brain gets shut off for that moment because it says if you think about it, you're going to get in the accident, right? Because if you thought and said, should I do this or this, you wasted all the time, right? And that's why that rational brain shuts down. Part of turning that rational brain back on and processing the fight or flight or that survival response that happens is working through it. And so the best thing you can do for yourself, for your kids, for your family is when something traumatic happens is to talk about it, to check in on emotions, to acknowledge that any emotions that you feel are okay and what do you need to help you not feel sad or scared, or what do you need from that moment, and teaching our kids to do that all the time. Like that process is what prevents trauma. And what is preventing trauma? Building resilience. It's
Mhm.
building our ability to handle things like the pandemic. So you see people out there that are doing fine, and they actually are doing fine because they've learned these skills already, right? And I've learned these skills. That doesn't mean I'm 100% fine, but I know how to reach out to friends. I know what I need to do. And I'm constantly asking myself, okay, so you're having a hard day. What do you need? And then I go and do that for myself, because that's what takes care of me. Right. And I do it with my daughter. Right. Um, yeah, we've had a hard 18 months. It's still
Mhm.
not easy. But the difference is for us is asking those questions and making sure we have what we need.
Yeah. I
Skills and
also,
tools, skills and tools, those are from the professionals.
yeah.
But you can Google a lot, and if you find my YouTube, there's a couple of videos on there on some tools you could use for managing anxiety, panic attacks, and stuff like that. So it's a good tool to have.
So what is the website? Same myself from North Carolina. Where
Well,
do we?
you can look up for me on YouTube. So it's Cheryl Resiliency Coach on YouTube. So there's a
Okay.
couple videos up there. I've got a few more that I need to upload in the next month or so, probably. So there's that. I've got an ebook as well, so we can set you up to download that if you want, that
Beautiful.
describes some of those tools that you can do in those moments to manage. You know,
Yeah.
I've got kids doing tools while they're in class. Teenagers that friends don't know what they're doing, but they're using tools to manage anxiety and panic and worry in
Yeah.
class.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. And I find an attitude of gratitude is really important too right
for
now,
sure,
you know.
for sure. Yeah.
Um, the last topic, we've gone a little over, but we're having a good discussion. And, trauma, as we talked about, plays out in relationships. And
Hmm.
and you talked about this already. You made a post on Facebook yesterday about Gabby
Hmm.
Petito,
I
and she
did.
was involved in a narcissistic relationship. And your finding was so many women were going, yeah, me too, me too.
Hmm.
So she went missing. She's in the U.S., but it's presumed that she's been killed. And I think I just saw a story, maybe that's now confirmed.
Hmm.
Um, so in terms of these kinds of narcissistic relationships, what are some of the warning signs that you might be in one?
Um, the first warning sign to really pay attention is your own body response. Like if
Mhm.
something feels tight, something feels like you're expecting, retaliation or punishment or consequences to what you behave. If you don't feel accepted for who you are, or valued for who you are, if you have to change, those are some key things, right? We talk about red flags as in looking at the other person. Um, but the most important person is you, because even if that relationship isn't narcissistic or abusive, when someone's not good for you,
Mhm.
right? And it could be friends, right? So pay attention to your own body, to what's going on inside of you. If you feel like you're, collapsing or getting smaller around that person, or talking about that person, then there's a problem there. If you have to defend that person's behavior and make excuses for them, or tell lies or any of those things, those are warning signs that, regardless of whether this person is a good person or not, because we often do believe they're good at heart, the relationship isn't good for you, right?
Right.
The relationship itself needs to change or needs to end.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's my next question, because it could be a boss, it could be a spouse,
oh, totally.
or it could be a family member, or
Yep.
even the government. I don't want to get too political here.
It totally can.
But that's sort of narcissistic in character and behavior. How can we then end it? How can we extricate ourselves from them or from that situation? Because I think that's kind of what we're moving towards more.
I think the intention, underlying thing with every abusive or narcissistic relationship is a power imbalance, right? So, I mean, clearly, when we have, someone in a power position, like a parent or an employer, or even the government, or someone who gets to tell us what we have to do, like there's already inherently a power imbalance there. And so we can't change that, and we can acknowledge it because it's there for a reason. But is that relationship, that power being abused, being not, um, not used in a way that's, productive and helpful to everyone involved? So, speaking up for yourself can help. But there's a caveat always to speaking up for yourself, because there's always a question of, what is the consequences of speaking up? And so getting support and speaking with someone outside of the situation, really getting a handle on the perspective is a good thing to do, right? Um, in terms of workplace, it could be speaking to someone else about your workplace, speaking to a professional, um, in a in a counseling capacity, or speaking with someone who is in a similar workplace that can say, nope, that dynamic is all wrong. There's a problem. Um, and then, moving forward with, and of course it's circumstantial what's going on with you, but like moving forward with HR or something like that. There are places in the government that are designed to look out for you, in terms of workplaces, in terms of families. Um, Sometimes we do have to remove ourselves from situations. Sometimes we need to communicate healthy boundaries and say what's okay with me and what's not. And hopefully those people will recognize that, like, what's good for you and, what they're doing is not good for you. But it's always about, I think the most important thing is getting the support, because we can't see our own situation clearly a lot of the time. It's really clouded by our past experiences. It's clouded by, our own belief systems. It's clouded by any of that, um, programming that's gone in, the gaslighting, you know, telling the things that have been said to us change how we perceive the world. And so it's important, I think, really to get the support that you need in order to make a decision like that, because it is life changing, right? It's totally life changing. And I did go and get help myself before I made that decision. In fact, I went to a women's shelter. I lived in Barrie at the time. And I went to the women's shelter there, and I had conversations with them, and I saw the lawyer, and I talked to them, and I said, what are my next steps? And safety plan was the first thing. So, um, those things are important in every relationship where there is potential for harm. And I'm not talking just physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, abuse
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
So safety planning, if you're planning on leaving, is very key. It's very key.
And last question, how long does it take to heal from a relationship like that?
Well, some people take all of their lives, and you know, and I think it really depends on how much work you're doing and how willing you are, and where you're willing to ask for help. For me, I spent the first 5 years going through the traditional route, counselors, um, therapists, that kind of thing. And then I realized that, as much as I understood that I was really awesome and I had lots of guys who wanted to date me and all of those things, and I'm the best, underneath, I still felt like a bag of, I still believed all those things that he said to me,
What?
valuable and ugly and stupid. And I still unconsciously believed all that stuff. And so I found a coach who worked with the unconscious mind that would help me change all of that. And it was fast. It was really fast. Um, about 6 to 8 weeks it took to change who I thought I was, excuse me, to erase all of that old stuff. And so that was really important for me. Um, it took a little longer to get rid of the triggers, the body responses, the panic attacks that would happen, the, um, hairs on the back of my head showing up every time I got a text from my ex. But that was because my coach didn't know how to do it. And I couldn't find anybody who did. And that's why I'm an expert in that area now, because I had to go find the sources for myself. So, I work with people now who do this work with me one on one. And it, not to say your life is completely, perfect in 8 weeks, but it can be so significantly different that you can attract a partner who you really deserve, like attract the right kind of person and the right kind of workplace, and know your own value and what you're worth and what you need and want in this life. So, you can spend a long time doing it, or you can invest in yourself and do it a lot quicker and actually get to live the life that you want. it's the difference between thriving and surviving, right?
Yeah.
Surviving is just getting out and being okay. And I don't know. I don't know about you, but I mean, okay is just okay. Like I
Yeah.
want to live like an amazing life.
Yeah.
And so it's worth that investment to me. And it was, believe me, it's been a lot of investment.
I bet. No, we could go on talking about trauma and its effects, but it
Totally
has
good.
impact on your money, your work, your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-love,
Mhm.
your health, how we treat our very self. So, in closing, if you had if you had to offer a message of hope to somebody going through it, what would that be?
I think, we could say lots of hopeful things, but I think the real honest thing is that you're only seeing just a tiny small piece of who you really are. Um, like someone has literally put you in a box, and and it's been safe to stay in that box, or at least you stay there for, you know, reasons of thinking that's how you're going to get through it. Um, but there's so much more outside of that box. There's so much more when you step out into the real world, and adventure and excitement and joy and love, and you know you deserve that. You deserve that. And you can have that. If I can have it, then you can too. And it doesn't mean that you have to see it. That's the job of the people you're working with. That's the job of your coach. That's the job of your social worker, the job of your counselor, the job of your friends, is to see the potential for you and the magnificence of the life that you really could have, and the life that you could give to your children. Because, I'll be honest, I didn't see it for myself. I wanted it for my kids.
Beautiful.
And
And
so
and
that's what I want for you.
yeah, and if you choose to stay in the box, it's kind of like I mentioned Kyle Cease, and I really do
Mhm.
recommend you check out his YouTube
Okay.
channel.
I'm writing them down.
As he just spoke about this, I think this week or last week in his
Okay.
cast, and he gave the example of Shawshank Redemption, the movie,
Yes.
and
Love
they
that
got
movie.
out. He got out, right, and then he couldn't handle being out because all he knew was the box.
Mhm.
And then eventually, as he was out, he committed suicide. Because it was
Yeah.
just so new, and that's who we're becoming. Like we're it's not maybe showing up yet, but we're gonna be breaking
There
out of
will
that.
be.
Yeah,
Yeah, there will be a lot of stress once, and I've seen this a lot too with people, when as the doors start to open again. For some people, that's when the anxiety and panic and all of that stuff actually kicks in,
yeah,
because they've been safe inside that box. There's a
yeah.
really good movie I watched in class for class. What's it called? Room. It's really good. It's hard to watch, but it really illustrates the idea of what happens when we are contained for so long, and then when those doors open, um, how you have to learn how to live life a different way. And so
Yes.
that's why you seek someone like me, who goes with you, right? I figured it out for myself. I've gotten the help that I need, and I go with my clients. It's never a part of I know better than you. It's like I go with you, help you figure out what you need, and help you step out into your new adventures.
Yeah, that's what it is, and that's the curiosity of the new, right?
Yep, yep.
Cheryl Martin, thank you so much for this today. What a joy. Website, what's the website? Soul Spark?
Yeah, soulsparksisters.ca is my website. It's in need of an update. So most of the people follow me on Facebook, sometimes on Instagram. So those are probably good places to check too. There's a YouTube there as well. I think most of everything else is Cheryl Resiliency Coach. So if you Google that, you'll find all of my media. And I encourage you to reach out to me directly if you want to have a chat about some of this, or if you want some of those resources I can share with you.
Excellent. I want to thank you for watching and listening today, because we're on Mixcloud audio-wise and YouTube
Awesome.
video. Thank you for being part of the RiSE podcast. Our goal, remember, is to inspire individuals like you, to rise up, inspire, make an impact, be socially aware, and continue the entrepreneurial spirit to make the world a little bit better. Join us next week. And she says hello. Our guest next week is Emmy Rousseau.
Hey, it's Emmy.
Yeah, as we talk about the value of visualization and how that can play out in your life. Until then, I'm your host, David Cohen. Let us know what you like. Donate to our Patreon page so we could expand this. Or our Patreon is a site where you can make a donation if you'd like. Until next week, rise up. Have a great week, everybody. Bye for now. And Cheryl, thank you.
Thank you, David.